Says it's 1 o'clock. So welcome everybody to the December 13th meeting of the Building Fire Residential and WUI Code Committee meeting. And could you please take attendance?
BFRW Committee Chair Roger Haringa.
I am here.
Damon Doyle. Not seeing them in the room here today. Dan Young.
Present.
Todd Bayrether.
Here.
Angela Haupt.
Here.
Katie Sheehan. Not seeing them in the room. And Craig Holt. Not seeing them in the room either. And with that, we just have a quorum. Oh, Roger, you're muted.
I am sorry. Item number 2 on the agenda is review and approve the agenda. The agenda is up on the screen. Guess I would ask for a motion, and if there are any motion and a second first, and then if there are any comments about the agenda.
Todd, I move to approve.
Thanks, Todd.
Second.
I didn't hear who the second was.
That's Dan.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Are there any comments? Hearing none, can we, all those in favor of approving the agenda say aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the agenda passed, and I am going to apologize and step back to number 1 and ask if there are any members of the public that would like to introduce themselves. Patrick?
Yes, thank you. This is Patrick Hanks with the Building Industry Association of Washington.
Thanks, Patrick. Anybody else? Let's see anybody. I see an iPad, but all right. On to agenda item number 3, review and approve the minutes from September 13th. Dustin, if you could put those up and we could look through them. Are there any comments that people would have on the minutes? Hearing none, if I could get a motion to approve the minutes of September 13th.
So move. This is Todd.
Second,
Todd.
Angela.
Thanks, Angela. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Now we move on to agenda item number 4. I like how fast we're going through these agenda items. Is there any public comment on items that are not on the agenda? If so, please raise your hand. And I am not seeing any of your hands raised. Dustin, if I missed somebody. Oh, Patrick, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I just want to bring this up since the building tag is running a bit late in the process of reviewing proposals, and there's some proposals in there that have economic impacts that will potentially increase construction costs. And when those things come up, I also have some of those I raised up earlier that I don't think would be considered complete. And those were never revised. And so I'm wondering, as the tag earlier in the process, there was discussion about involving the work group of economic impact, but I haven't really heard any concrete discussion about how that's going to look like, or when we're going to have them meet, or if the tag's going to send it to the work group, and then the work group's going to send it back to the tag, and then the tag's going to send it to the committee, or if it's going to come to the committee and then go there. I was kind of hoping that we could have some discussion on the record about how we're going to move forward as we're kind of coming down to the wire. And next week, the building tag's going to look at reviewing all their proposals.
Okay. I think we could go ahead and try to address that now, as long as the decision doesn't get too far out of hand. Dustin, can you respond as far as the schedule goes?
Yeah, so in order to address that concern, we are planning on convening the work group of economic impact to assist in getting the appropriate data for our cost benefit analysis and small business economic impact statement. As I see it, I don't, as we're moving these proposals towards CR 102, we're mainly addressing the technical code language. As we get ready to prepare those reports, we will have moved the technical code language on towards preparation of the CR 102. And then the work group of economic impact will meet prior to the filing of the CR 102 to address the economic impact of the proposals. So we'll be working with that group here in the coming future to do that. As far as a schedule of when that meeting or when that group will meet, that has not been developed yet and it's not published out there. I would just say stay tuned for additional work on that one. Those meetings will be noticed as well in accordance with the OPMA. And the whole goal there is to get a cost benefit analysis and the small business economic impact statement that is can withstand some scrutiny.
Okay, Todd?
Patrick, are you referring specifically to building code petitions? Or in general of all petitions, including fire, like we're hearing today?
Mainly the building code. I didn't see any off the top of my head in the fire code that we're gonna had increased costs.
Just to clarify, Patrick made comment at several of our tag meetings on certain proposals that had economic impact, and his view was that some of those statements for the economic impact were maybe lacking a little bit. And in the spirit of getting better information, that is why we're bringing proposals to the work group of economic impact to get better information there.
And Patrick, I have to go back and remind myself of all of the details, so I'm taking this off of memory, but I seem to remember that there were a couple stages. The first is the proposal deemed complete? And initially that is done by the staff. And I know questions have come up on a few, and I don't remember how many during the review of those. And at least some of those have provided more information. And I believe that the bar that proponents are required to do at this point is to provide enough information that is so that the proposal is deemed complete. That would be the information that goes through prior to approval by the tag and by by this committee. I'm a little bit unclear. Dustin, what is the target for publishing the CR 102?
So it'll be within the next year, but it won't be directly after our council meeting approving our proposals towards CR 102. If we
Okay.
were to file it immediately after that council meeting, final council action would have to occur, I believe it's 180 days after the filing or after the publication of that filing. So
Okay.
if we acted on the filing immediately, we would have to convene a special meeting. Well, maybe not special, but
Yeah.
we would have to have the topic at a meeting outside of what the intended adoption of all the codes, which is slated to be in the December timeframe next year. So we're looking for the mid-year
Yeah.
timeframe to get those filed.
So my memory is that once the there is the question, the bar that has to be exceeded to make sure that the proposal is complete. That there's no, well, people can potentially disagree with that. There is nothing in the RCW that says who determines whether it's complete. And I
Say that that is
No.
correct. Yes.
And I know that the discussions that we have had at council is that staff. So certainly we have, Dustin, I believe, has tried to address any, if there have been questions about whether those are complete or not, we've tried to address those as we've gone through. So I think that if there's further study that needs to happen for economic impact, it would happen this spring prior to the filing of the CR 102. Does that sound appropriate or correct, Dustin, as far as your understanding?
That is the vision I have for the process, yes.
Okay. Are there any other questions? And Patrick, did we answer your question?
I'll say generally you answered some of the timeline questions, yes.
Thank you. Any other comments? All right, let's move on to agenda item number 5. And Dustin, I'm going to turn it over to you to present these and share the information. I'm going to assume that we will want to vote on each of the 3 individually.
We could, that's been traditionally how we have covered individual opinions. If we wanted to, we could take them as a group, but I would prefer them individually.
Okay. So let's start with the November 6th City of Bellevue question about the IBC 429.
Gotcha. Getting. Okay, is that large enough for everybody? I can make it bigger if we like. Looks like everybody's scooting in. I'll make it bigger. And all right. So on this one has to do with electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Our next one also has to do with EV charging, but it's a little bit different. So they're separated as far as the opinions go. So background, the 2018 Washington International Building Code section 429.2 included language that stated where parking is provided, end quote, indicating that the requirements were to be applied to any parking provided to a new building regardless if that parking was required or not. In the 2021 IBC, the language has changed, and the charging language in 429.2 references the table. This table appears to require full compliance with the table for all parking provided on single occupancy buildings. However, for buildings with more than one occupancy, section 429.2 states, quoted, table 429.2 shall be applied to the number of spaces required for each occupancy, end quote. The number of parking spaces provided for a building is not typically determined by the building code in most jurisdictions, but rather by land use codes. The first question then follows, if you have a building with multiple occupancies, are the EV parking requirements only to be applied to the number of parking spaces required by local ordinances? And the draft answer is yes. In my review of these sections of the building code for parking, I don't see a section that calls out specific parking being required, only that when it is required, there are provisions that apply. And then following up on question 1, if the parking is provided for a building that contains multiple occupancies and the number of spaces exceeds the number required by local ordinance, does any part of 429.2 apply to those additional parking spaces? And the answer I put in there is yes. The building code doesn't specify how much parking is there in section 429.2 only talks about the parking spaces in total. And so 429.2 would apply to all of the parking spaces intended to be included, even if they are in addition to the minimum number required to the local ordinance. And then finally, if a building is primarily an R2 occupancy, but has a smaller single tenant space available for Group A or Group M usage, does this building contain more than one occupancy as indicated in 429.2, and therefore only need to meet the requirements in line with the answers to question 1 and 2? And I have the draft answer there as yes. I don't have a lot of explanation on this one other than, the 429.2 applies to total amounts of parking, not necessarily what is slated for individual occupancies by local jurisdictions, even though the Group A and M mixed use building or in the R2 occupancy as well will necessarily make the entire parking lot subject to the requirements of 429.2. So those are my draft answers on there, and be happy to discuss further.
Todd?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, this is the point I was trying to make in a fairly recent meeting, just to clarify so everyone knows that parking is not required in the building code. It's usually determined by the market or more often by local zoning or land use. And some of this is just the way Bellevue wrote the questions and we copied and pasted here. I would like to manipulate the questions a little bit, but that's not the point here. Question 1 is, well, first of all, when they set up the statement here, you're just copying what they wrote in the letter. It's not always land use though, right? It could be the technicality of a zoning code or so forth, but that doesn't really matter. The intent is understood here. In the first question, it would help to clarify that, or the market, because it's kind of addressed in question 2 that it says if you're exceeding the minimum, the parking minimum by local ordinance, that your percentages are based off of the number of parking you're providing, right? I think that's understood. That's not clear in 1 though, right? Because question 2 has an and in there, it's saying because it has multiple occupancies and the number of spaces exceed, we don't technically address just the condition where it exceeds. So examples were given in a meeting recently about, parking at a 1 or 1.5 per unit, and that might be per local ordinance, but sometimes in vehicle kind of specific typologies like 3-story garden walkers or 2, like that could be up to 2 just for market requirements. So I think that should be clear somehow.
Would it be made more clear by modifying the question just a little bit and maybe not modifying the answer?
Sure, if that's allowed.
I don't see why it wouldn't be. A lot of times when other questions are coming in, they're trying to be modified so that they are more succinct in what we're addressing here. And so
Okay.
they're modifying the question to get the answer correct and cover the basis.
Okay. And maybe no one else has that concern, but I just wanted to state that. Thank you.
Thanks, Todd. Micah?
Thanks. I've mulled this request over and over and over. I definitely think there needs to be more added or requested from Bellevue here. Again, I think 429.1 and 0.2 of the code are incorrect based on the legislation. The legislation is probably more restrictive in the sense that the legislation 1927.540 item 2A says where parking is provided. Has nothing to do with the requirement. So I understand what the code language says, and I again, we probably need to modify this section because the language does talk about where required, but the RCW says we're provided. So the intent of the RCW is to provide EV infrastructure where parking is provided, regardless of what the requirement is based on land use standards. That's gonna be my attempt there. I think the answers here are actually based on the code language, somewhat correct, but I think based on the RCW that they're not. My understanding is EV infrastructure per the RCW should be installed where any parking is provided, even though the code language is not accurate to the RCW. Thanks.
Thanks, Micah. Angela?
Angela, you're on mute still.
Yeah, sorry, working with different screens. So I guess where is the wording required in 429.2? I'm looking at it and it says where provided. Building accessory structures shall be provided with EV chargers, blah, blah, blah. Capable parking in accordance with table 429.2. So where in 429.2 does it say required versus provided? Yeah, Micah, maybe you can,
Yeah, I was gonna answer that. Just a quick question. Are you looking at the WAC or the Washington Custom Code?
I'm looking at the Washington Custom Code.
Yeah, the WAC has it in, it's different in the WAC. I think it was modified after the Washington Custom Code was reviewed. And I'm not sure which is correct. Probably the Washington Custom Code is correct based on the proposal, but who knows? But sentence two of 429.2 in the WAC says where the building contains one or more than one occupancy, the EV infrastructure percentages of the table shall be applied to the number of spaces required for each occupancy. So that's where it says the required language.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I just got confused there. Can we pull the whack up, please? I need to make sure I understand this.
Oh, sorry, I'm not sharing my screen when I'm doing all this.
Oh, you had it up?
Website
Okay,
navigation.
what whack is it, just so I can also search?
Sorry, 1 second.
Micah, what whack is it?
It's 5150-0429.
Thank you.
I've got it.
And I'm sorry, the code actually, when you go to that section for multiple occupancies, it does say required in the Washington Custom Code. Sorry, I missed that.
I guess that's part of my question on the opinion. Do we need to only provide opinion on the WAC language specific, which is probably the case? However, again, this is where the RCW code language throws a wrench in how we do our process for SBCC.
And just, we've been over this so many times, but can you state it one more time, Micah? Which, you know, so the argument that you're asking, should the RCW be referenced in this response also?
It might end up changing the answer in how it's viewed because the RCW is specific to provided on-site parking. Doesn't specify required on-site parking. It should apply to provided on-site parking. And thank you, Dustin, for pulling up a split screen. But as you can see highlighted, it applies to where provided, not where required.
Right, but
I believe the intent of the legislation was to provide EV infrastructure at these percentages wherever on-site parking is provided, regardless of the requirements of the jurisdiction.
and isn't that what I was saying? And Angela was also in the WAC, and that while we don't use the word provided in the WAC, it doesn't say by ordinance anywhere, right? Required anywhere. It says what is required. It just doesn't say based off some other ordinance requirement or something. I think that wasn't that the point I was trying to make earlier, that it's just,
It probably is, and that's probably the intent of this question.
okay.
Does the application of the EV infrastructure only apply to the required spaces?
Well, and that's why I want to clarify, because I don't want to give the impression that you base it off of what the local ordinance says.
No,
Because in
I agree.
Spokane, that's a big zero, right? Everywhere. So
Right. No, I think that's my question is, do we base the opinion, the response from SBCC on the specific code language in the WAC, or do we incorporate the language or intent of the RCW? They are different.
Or just simply state both. Hey,
Yeah.
do you know? This is what they both say, and this is why the opinion is such. Yeah. Yeah, I'm okay with that.
So do you have a proposal, Todd, a proposed? theme to
I'm
the
not as-
committee?
well, Mike is going to feed it to us.
I'm gonna,
I don't have one. That's why I'm laughing too. I'm like, I don't have proposed language because I don't know. That's why I was suggesting maybe reaching back out to the requester at Bellevue and say, do you want us to incorporate that? Is that part of your opinion? And maybe they review the request differently or phrase it differently if that was what they were looking for. That's all.
and Angela?
Yeah, so I'm kind of understanding why it says required when you have the multiple occupancies, because there are some occupancies that don't require EV charging in any way. If they're not covered in the table, then no matter how much parking you provide for it, it wouldn't need to have EV. But then, and so, yeah, so I see how it kind of wants to break it up, but yeah, it's just confusing because the multiple occupancies isn't actually covered in the RCW. But it, yeah, does sort of conflict. So yeah, I'm I'm having a problem wrapping my head around it.
Whoever is on the iPad, your hand is up and go ahead and share. If you could identify yourself, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I'm Darren Holmchuk with the City of Bothell, a plan reviewer. I'm new to this, so I was just wondering, the RCW 1927-540 number 2, subsection B just says that it's assembly, education, mercantile. It only applies to employee parking spaces. So how do you deal with customers in that case where it wouldn't apply? And then my other question would be, the IEBC 3067 for site or facility, would that enter into the picture for existing buildings? Because is this just for new or existing when they upgrade a site? So that's just my two questions. I don't know how that enters in here, but I just thought I'd throw that in there. Thanks.
I'll be cautious to answer part of the question, but I believe that there is one of the things that we're pondering in the IBC tag is a modification to the IEBC, which and I'll paraphrase, but at this point, the IEBC does not kick us over to 429 of the IBC. But there is a proposal to change that. So for large modifications, and I'm not getting my code language right, but is it a type 3 modification that would kick you over to IBC 429? So that's something that is under consideration for the new code cycle. I don't know, Angela, do you have or Dustin, a response to Darren's other question?
As far as for the employee parking section for B, so under 429.2 in the exceptions, it actually does, exception 2 covers group A, E, and M occupancies, and it has 2 options for complying. One is and it's the following, whichever is greater. So it's the provisions of sections 429.2 shall apply only to designated employee parking spaces, or number 2, one of each 200 parking spaces or fraction thereof shall be EV ready. One of each 200 spaces or fraction thereof shall be EV charging. So it's kind of, I think, yeah, I don't know where the number 2 came from, but the number 1 seems to sort of cover that B in the RCW.
Okay, thank you.
Did you have another question, Angela?
No, sorry.
Okay. I'm just going to say from the conversation, it appears to me that between the RCW and the 2018, that it is meant to be parking provided needs to meet this table. And so if there, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, or if people don't share that opinion. So the answer for the 2021 code, which I'm a little bit, yes, the language where parking is provided may not be in there, but the you know, it does say for all parking, you know, I don't know, it seems like it is not completely clear. And I would think that our answer should be to try to clarify it so that it would be considered for parking that is provided, not the minimum requirement. Todd?
Yeah, I agree. And I think, you know, we have the opportunity here since we're coming back next week with this committee. Maybe we can capture our conversation here in the next week and give that clarity, just use it as an opportunity to describe our hamster wheel of RCW and WAC on this topic.
So would it be,
I also want,
so reach back out to Bellevue and clarify if they want us to reference both RCW and our WAC?
I don't know if we have to ask. I just think make sure that, to me, in this question one was, are you specifically asking, is it based off of the local ordinance requirement? And say, because we want to give the answer that here's what the WAC says, here's what the RCW says, and this is our opinion on that interpretation that's provided, even though provided isn't necessarily said in the WAC. Am I getting that correct?
So
Micah will provide it for us.
I am also wondering, because we most likely, I don't know if it's scheduled yet, but have another one of these meetings next Friday. And on Tuesday, we have an IBC tag meeting that is most definitely going to be talking about EV ready parking. That maybe we postpone this today, at least until next week's meeting. Because I think there's going to be
their opinion to that agenda if we would like to include it in the conversation.
Yeah, Roger, that's what I meant.
okay.
That's also what I was suggesting. Yep. Although I think we should go through their questions and talk about them.
Okay.
And then we can decide at the next meeting if we feel we can take care of it as the committee or we need to raise it up to the council.
Okay, so have we addressed question one and question two? I think that Dustin, the answer got expanded on question one. Is that not correct?
It definitely got expanded, and it's to be where provided, is gonna be included in there. I would, I guess, like the opportunity to draft that, maybe not on the fly.
Okay.
And bring it back to the group.
Okay. Question two, we talked about, I think. Did we address question three? I think that Angela answered that, right?
I believe so. She was
Yeah.
referring to the exceptions 2.1 and 2.2.
Okay. I guess I would ask for a motion to postpone the answering of this question until next week's meeting. I believe that's appropriate.
So moved. Is it Todd?
We have a second.
This is Dan, I'll second it.
Thanks, Dan. Is there any other discussion? And Micah, go ahead.
I apologize. What on question three, was the answer that you don't have to provide parking for the R2 occupancy? You only have to provide it for the A and M? That question is confusing to me, and I'm not sure if that answer was accurate. And we can address this as we look at it next week, but that's my question for probably to look at for next week.
So my intent on this one is that, in accordance to the answers that we're talking about, is that it's not necessarily based on the ordinance that drives the amount of parking may be required, but if parking is provided, we are applying the provisions of table 429.2 to all of those occupancies in there. And then I guess we're looking at the exceptions 2.1 and 2.2 to really narrow down what's required for the assembly or mercantile occupancies.
Okay, that's not how I read that question.
Okay.
It sounded like the question to me says, do we have to provide EV infrastructure for the overall building in line with questions 1 and 2, which would only apply for the R2 occupancies where parking is required. But I don't think that's correct. That's how I read that. Again, it's something we can discuss further, and Angela has her hand up. Go for it.
Go ahead, Angela.
Yeah, again, this comes down to that. I mean, the first question was, is it considered more than one occupancy? Which, yeah, it is. They're not an accessory use to the R2 or anything. So it's a mixed occupancy building. It then gets down to the word, once you get into that more than one occupancy, the word required. Is it supposed to be required or is it supposed to be provided? And as required, I mean, then I would still read that. Okay, so how many spaces were required by whatever the jurisdiction, I guess. I mean, because yeah, the word required gets you into all sorts of places. Was it required by the developer? Was it required by, whatever? But anyway, I always kind of go with what did the jurisdiction in some way require? So it would be what number of spaces are assigned to the R2. Okay, those that are required, you'd use the table. The same with each of the other 2 occupancies, so if, say, like in Spokane, there's parking required for R2, but not A and M, then it would only apply to the spaces that were for the R2. If there were each individual, then they would individually be addressed. So, I mean, their question in essence is it more than one occupancy? The answer is yes. And so it would line up with the answers above that we came up with. But again, it's the word required that is throwing a whole bunch of gray into everything. Did that make any sense?
I think so. And,
Yeah.
maybe on this specific question, it might be beneficial to reach out to Bellevue and maybe clarify exactly what they're asking for this question.
Just raise my
All
hand
right.
here.
Yes. Go ahead, Bob.
I guess I thought we were getting there, but I'm a little thrown by it doesn't matter what's required by local ordinance. Am I misinterpreting 429.2 all along? That's what's provided. Doesn't matter what the local ordinance or what insurance or what market requires. It's what's provided in the design, right? Or am I wrong?
Go ahead, Micah.
Let Angela go.
Go ahead, Angela.
No, I was going to say, if it's a single occupancy building, the state code says it's on all parking that's provided. Doesn't matter if it exceeds what was required. But when you get into then the last sentence that you have more than one occupancy, then it changes it to what's required for each of those occupancies. So I think what it's meaning to say is to the parking provided for the individual occupancies, but that's not, I mean, that could be how it could be interpreted, I suppose. But I think that's what it's trying to say is it's not you go, worst case scenario and require the most possible. It's the developer is supposed to assign parking for, okay, how much is it for this occupancy? How much is this for occupancy? And how much is this? And then it would based on those totals. But as worded, if you have more than one occupancy, then you have to look at what's required and what's extra now. So it's two different answers. Yeah.
Okay.
Welcome to my
Yeah.
world.
Patrick?
It seems like to me that the word required is just in reference to the table. And the only instance where there's a difference between requirements for occupancies is if you're mixing group R with another occupancy, and the only different requirement is for the number of EV ready parking spaces. And so required, unless there's another part of the code that typically references local land use or local ordinances, the word required to me seems like it's just referencing the requirements of the table. So each occupancy has to comply with its requirements under the table.
Angela?
So I'm pretty sure that there are other areas of the code that use required as far as parking. And I think it's actually, and Micah can correct me maybe off the top of his head, but chapter 11 for accessibility for required parking space, for required accessible parking spaces. Oh, except that, yeah, it kind of depends. But I'm pretty sure somewhere else there are areas, a couple that reference required parking. And so that's, again, I would love to see Patrick's interpretation there, like I said, because it should be applied to all of the provided and then just broken up. I just don't know it. Yeah, again, it's how you deem the word required and where it applies.
I'm going to just suggest it is obviously very confusing. I do think we mostly agreed at this meeting that the intent of the RCW and the 2018 code was that it should all be calculated on what is provided and then clarified. So I'm just going to ask for a vote for us to postpone this until next week. And I hope between the IBC tag and our meeting next week, my hope is that we can simplify it. I mean, if we have the opportunity now to go through this, and we're looking exactly on, some of the proposals are exactly on 429 and the table. So hopefully between the IBC tag and our meeting next week, we can clarify for the 2024 code moving forward, so there is less confusion. At least that's my hope.
It demonstrates the need for this discussion, because I was interpreting like Patrick is so.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So, Patrick, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering if Angela could mention the section of code that she said referred to local ordinances, just so that for my own research purposes.
Oh, no, it doesn't. Nothing ever refers to local ordinances. I just checked, and chapter 11 doesn't say where required. It does say where provided. So I am hallucinating back to a previous code. I'm sure there's been way too many of them in my career. So yeah, so nowhere does, I'm pretty sure the state codes don't reference local ordinances as far as what's provided. I was just going off of just the difference in the words, and I'd have to research more to see if there is any place now. I just vaguely remember, but no, like I said, I would love to interpret it the way you are, and I probably had been. I mean, if I was still doing daily reviews. So again, it's what the code always comes down to is word semantics, and yeah.
Okay. If there are no other comments, we have a motion on the table to postpone this until next week's meeting. So I will ask for all those in favor, can you please say aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. So this one, motion passes, and we will pick this back up again next week. So Dustin, I know it is related, but I agree the next one is a little bit different. Todd, do you have a
Just real quick, can someone cite the RCW one more time? I just lost it.
It's 1927.540.
Okay, thank you.
Dustin, you said that the next one from the city of Vancouver is a little bit different. I agree it is in reading it, but can you go ahead and present that? And we may need to do the same thing, but let's look at this one and see if it see if we can answer.
So, this one comes from City of Vancouver, and the question is basically, is it the intent of the EV charging requirements to apply to fleet vehicle areas and vehicle storage areas? Looking at this one, I feel that, you know, on a personal level, if you have a yard full of vehicles, you may not necessarily need EV charging requirements. But in order to try to answer this one most effectively, I went back and looked at the history of the legislation of EV requirements in Washington. And so I give a little narrative in the beginning part of this answer, which is in 2009, the substitute Senate House, or I'm not sure what the acronym means, but the bill 1481 directed the state building code council to adopt rules for EV infrastructure. There was no specific code language included in that directive. And I didn't get into what was actually adopted by SBCC at that time. In 2019, another bill 1257 added some specific requirements for SBCC to adopt those rules at all new buildings that provide on-site parking. And looking into the reason statements of that legislation, the legislature of the state of Washington finds, and this is a quote from those bills, the widespread adoption of zero emission vehicles is essential to the achievement of the state emissions limits established in RCW 70A.45.020, which by 2050 requires a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions to 5 million metric tons and the achievement of net zero greenhouse gas emissions. And so to that kind of priming for my answer here is that fleet vehicle areas and vehicle storage areas are not specifically exempt in our code language that we have within the rules adopted by the SBCC. And my answer is then, if the local code official determines that either of these types of areas constitutes on-site parking, the provisions of the International Building Code Section 429 apply. So I could see a separated lot. If you have a car dealership, for instance, that has their inventory stored next door on a essentially vacant lot with not a lot of infrastructure, that you may not necessarily need EV charging requirements there. But if the local code official determines that that is considered on-site parking, then yes, the provisions of 429 would apply.
Okay. Are there any comments? Patrick, go ahead.
This, I think, gets into a broader topic that I referenced in some tag meetings recently, where when I was working on this section, I realized that the code doesn't define exactly what a parking space is. And so it gets in kind of to an area of, you know, is a storage area or a fleet vehicle area, is that the same thing as a parking space? And if there's an argument to be made that it isn't, the code only refers to parking spaces.
Okay. Angela?
So I guess yeah, I think it does come down to if the building official deems it to be on-site parking, because things like fleet parking and what else was it?
Vehicle
Vehicle
storage.
storage or whatever. If they're on site with another building, there's nothing to say that they can say, oh, yep, this is fleet parking. And then all of a sudden they're done, and all of a sudden it's not. It's an actual parking garage. So I think it kind of I know we can't regulate what they might do, you know, after we do whatever, but So I mean, I think it does go along with, it's a building official determination.
Okay, Micah?
Thanks. There, just a note on the answer with the Senate bills and House bills. There was an updated bill in 2021 that we may want to reference because I think that goes even further than the previous two bills, and that's what the current code language is based off of, is the 2021 bill. I can get you a number real fast. For you, Dustin, it is engrossed second substitute House Bill 1287 from 2021. Thanks.
So, looking at wax, sorry.
Yeah, and the RCW, obviously, you can click to it pretty quickly.
So when I'm researching for this one, I didn't see that bill listed in these references here, which is, to my knowledge, where I go to find the
Select the
bills.
2021.
It's the 2021 one, Dustin. Click on that one.
I'm sorry. I did read this one. I didn't see it to necessarily apply to, I had it in my notes when I was researching for this one, but I didn't see it as giving me good information for why I'm putting my answer out there, which is, the goal for the state of Washington established by the legislature is to transition towards, as I assume, 100% EV vehicles in the future by 2050. And so in the spirit of that kind of goal, even if you're storing, 100, 200 EV vehicles on a side lot, I view personally that the requirement for EV charging is going to need to be there in the future. And in some of the conversations at our tag level, it's we're not projecting for what we have in effect right now, but what the future of EV charging requirements will be in the state. And so I'm happy to reference this bill. I just I don't remember my specific exact reason why I didn't include it, but I didn't think I was pulling specific good language from this one to include here, but I would be happy to. So I don't know. I got sidetracked on my thought there.
Todd?
So I get the logic. I think this all makes sense. We're really discussing what the definition of vehicle storage is. That defined somewhere? And if so, we're saying it's up for local interpretation, because Dustin, I agree with your point that, obviously the building code is related to the structures, the occupancy. That's what determines, it's saying parking for those occupancies. And if it can be easily argued that storage is not connected to the use of those buildings and the occupancy of that building. But what is vehicle storage? What's the definition of that?
I don't think it's defined anywhere in our building code or in any of these bills.
Okay. But I mean, everyone assumes is it part of retail, like a car lot, or is it considered long-term storage over a season or something?
Patrick?
This is just my understanding of it, not having expertise in it, is that vehicle storage can refer to like private storage. So sometimes people who have, legacy cars, they might store a vehicle in it's like a self-storage type situation for an extended period of time. But then fleet vehicle areas are, if you have a large shipping company with 200 vans or vehicles, they might have an area where they park all of those. So to me, these aren't necessarily parking spaces where the intent is, to have public or tenants or employees come during the day or night and charge their vehicle, but they kind of serve different purposes than regular parking spaces.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I guess my question there is, the S occupancy is considered in the table, right?
Yes.
Go ahead, Mike. You.
Thanks. And Dustin, the only reason I brought that updated bill up is I'm a nerd. So EV infrastructure and EV charging, electric vehicle, wasn't defined until the 2021 bill. So when we're talking about those terms in relation to our answers or even questions based on 429, I think it's important to be accurate with the most updated information. And those were defined terms in that legislation. So when we're talking about those specific terms or specific items, it's probably good to have the latest information there. That was all I was getting at. It's not that what you provided is wrong. I just think it should be included in the 2021 bill should be included just based on that as capturing all the appropriate information that is new for this section of code. Thanks.
Gotcha. So is it a lot of times I find defined terms in bills listed at the top of them? Is it just kind of defined in the body of these new sections that don't affect specific RCW?
In the 2021 bill, it's on page 6. Technically the bottom half of section 2, where you get into those newly defined terms that weren't there before. Again, they just add definitions pretty much at every legislative cycle, but that's it. Again, it's not vital. I'm just letting you know where I came up with that. Not that I'm just pulling it out of thin.
I appreciate it. And
So I do want to recognize we have two different things going on. Whether or not we should include the 2021 bill. And Dustin, I think because of the definitions, I guess I would agree with Micah that we should include that in the response. And then there's Patrick's and Todd's discussion about whether parking storage is defined and what that is meant to apply to. So Darren, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to say that the IBC 301 does talk about, for occupancy, it talks about classification of building and structures. It doesn't mention a parking lot as an occupancy. So, and a parking lot couldn't be an S. It would have to be a building or structure according to 301 of the IBC.
Good point. So where do we want to go as a committee? I'm not sure, Todd and Patrick, if we completely defined what a storage facility is.
No, I think we are reinforcing what Justin wrote as the response, because it's going to have to be the local jurisdiction determining whether that storage is tied to a building and an occupancy, then therefore this applies. I think that is what Darren just said is accurate. That,
okay,
as Dustin explained, if it's clearly a separated lot that has no tie to occupancy or use,
okay,
the building code doesn't apply.
and I think I like the directing it to the on-site language, that's the important piece of this answer. So Patrick, go ahead.
Yeah, I can understand giving it the discretion up to the local official. I think I would, if it were me, I would just say no, it doesn't apply, because I don't know, that's my interpretation. It's a different use case where, businesses are going to know whether or not they need EV charging for their fleet vehicle areas. The vehicle storage might be a different situation. So I guess in that sense, it makes sense to let the local official decide. But to me, for the fleet vehicle areas, the point of the parking space is a business might not necessarily know what the tenant is going to have or what their employees are going to have. So they need to have a certain number of EV charging infrastructure available, but they control what their fleet vehicle is. And so if they have EVs, they're going to know exactly how many charging capacity they need to fit that.
Okay. Micah, go ahead.
I'll throw one more wrinkle in it. I see where Darren was coming from. I kind of see where Patrick's coming from. And again, I think this has to go back to the legislative language. And do we incorporate the legislative language in the opinion, or do we just stick with the building code language? So in the section of the legislation that directs the SBCC to develop rules, it is section 4(2)B, states that the requirements of this section do not apply to occupancies classified as utility or miscellaneous. If this vehicle storage is utility or miscellaneous, I would say this doesn't apply. But again, this comes back down to the SBCC needs to make a decision if we're only going to interpret the code language, or if we're going to incorporate the RCW language or the legislative language in our interpretations. Thanks. Again, I'm throwing probably more wrenches in
No,
that. So I apologize.
Sorry, I'll raise my hand virtually here. Yeah, that's a good point. And so that's in the RCW, obviously, from that bill. So what is but that's up to the local jurisdiction again to determine occupancy, right? To make that call. I mean, we could clarify. I like the idea of including that in the response, is essentially what you're saying.
Yeah.
RCW says this, and it's up to the jurisdiction to.
Right. I guess technically it would be up to the applicant to determine occupancy and the building code to interpret or verify that it's accurate.
That's what I meant.
Yeah.
So Dustin, do you want to try to resolve this one today, or should we take this and it seems to me like we should reference the 2021 legislation
Or just the RCW.
and or the RCW.
Yeah.
Right.
I think, I would like to get the opinion out sooner than later, but we do have that next BFRW committee next week. We have a large, robust discussion on EV charging slated for Tuesday. I do not have an issue, postponing this one for one more week to get some more discussion going on the topic.
I would have a tendency to support that. Just, I think, again, there's a lot of moving parts on this section 429. So seeing if there's anything that we discussed at the IBC tag that would impact this, I'm not sure it would, but so Patrick, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to clarify that none of the proposals before the tag deal with defining what parking is. So I don't know if there'll be anything from that discussion that will pertain to this.
I think that's fair. I think we're just saying that we're dealing with multivariable calculus on parking and EV right now. And so maybe it just informs all of this. I think you're right though, Patrick.
Okay. Can I then get a motion for us to postpone this opinion as well till next week's meeting?
So moved. This is Todd.
Second,
Tom.
Angela.
Thanks, Angela. Is there any more discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. We'll address this again next week. So Dustin, can you go ahead and introduce the third opinion, which is City of Bellevue? Looks like IRC and residential energy code questions.
And this one was discussed briefly at the MVPE committee earlier today, and I had to step out at the end of the meeting when it was discussed. Krista, do you want to maybe characterize how they discussed this one?
Basically this is regarding question 3 and the requirement for a separate thermostat. Their arguments were on the difference between separate and separated and the connotations between that. And their comment was that should consider removing the D from separated in the answer. So separate thermostats are required for separate dwelling units. But that they are willing to consider this later, whether this goes to the council meeting or at a later committee meeting. The MVPE committee won't be meeting again until the January 10th meeting day.
Alrighty, so, I think question number 3 is characterized, and kind of primed by the answers to questions 1 and, well, the question 1. So they gave some background. IRC 302.3 allows one accessory dwelling unit constructed within an existing dwelling unit to not be considered a separated dwelling unit in a 2-family dwelling where all the required smoke alarms are interconnected. R 311.2 requires an egress door to be provided for each dwelling unit. And then Washington State Energy Code Residential, section R 501.1.2 requires a separate programmable thermostat for control of heating and cooling for accessory dwelling units. So question 1, is an accessory dwelling unit constructed within an existing dwelling unit with smoke alarms interconnected per 302.3 considered a separate dwelling unit or part of the primary dwelling unit? And the draft answer for that one is the Washington Amendment for section 302.3 states that one accessory dwelling is not considered a separate dwelling unit where all required smoke alarms are interconnected. I do believe we had a opinion request earlier in the year that talked about this one and the separation wall that was required between accessory dwelling units. And the answer we gave them is that if you are constructing new building square footage, that the separation wall would be required. And so in this question, the way it's drafted, if it's constructed within an existing dwelling unit, it's not considered a separate dwelling unit per the definition of the term in relation to our amendment to this section. So the answer is no, it's not a separated or separate dwelling unit there. It may be a separate dwelling, but not a separate dwelling unit.
Dustin, do we want to, I would wonder if we would want to clearly say no. I think in your answer there, it says, is not considered, but yeah,
Didn't mean to make it bold. Yelling at you. All right, I agree. No should be included there. No, the Washington Amendment for section 302.3 states one accessory dwelling unit is not considered a separate dwelling unit where all required smoke alarms are connected. Question 2, do both the primary dwelling unit and accessory dwelling need separate egress doors? And the answer I have drafted there is no. Where the accessory dwelling has all required smoke alarms interconnected, it is not considered a separate dwelling unit. Section 311.2 requires only one egress door per dwelling unit. On this one, it seems counterintuitive to the code official if you've got separate dwellings that they should have separate egress doors, but I think that if we're not considering them separate, that we only need the one egress door. And then that brings us to question 3. Does the accessory dwelling unit require a heating and cooling system controlled with a separate thermostat, even if they are not a separated dwelling unit in a 2-family dwelling? And I do like the MVPE tag suggestion to remove the D in the answer on separated. Then the answer I have drafted is no, separate thermostats are only required for separate dwelling units. And most of my answers stem from the definition of dwelling unit, which is a independent unit, containing all the provisions for, cooking, eating, sleeping, and sanitation. And I'm probably paraphrasing and remembering incorrectly the definition of that. It reads something to that effect.
Dustin, where you've stated question number 3, I think that you have heating a cooling system. I think that's supposed to be heating and cooling system on the first line.
You're correct, there's an extra word there. All right.
Or heating slash or heating and cool. I thought it was and. Require a heating and cooling system. That's what you said when you read it, but
My mind probably just filled it in.
okay. Are there questions or comments? Micah, go ahead.
All right, I'm gonna have some differing opinions on this one for sure. I obviously do a lot of work in this, and we had a hand, when I say we, Wabo had a hand in modifying R3023. The intent of this was specific to not classifying it as a 2-family dwelling for the separation purposes. That's what 3023 applies to. When you look at the other items for egress and heating, that is different. You would classify it as a dwelling unit for those, in my opinion. So answers 2 and 3 should be different. Again, when we're looking at charging language of each individual section of the code, the 2-family dwelling charging language of 3023 is for providing separation between the two and not classifying it as a two-family dwelling unit. It's still a dwelling unit for other intents and purposes, for heating. I think this came up a few years ago on the thermostat question, and that's why I believe that code change went in specific in 501 of the Residential Energy Code that says, hey, yes, you got to provide a separate thermostat. I want to say this went in maybe 2 cycles ago, but for the Residential Energy Code. So I might have to say I disagree with question or answers to questions 2 and 3. And I think you should be more specific on answer to question 1, and that it is not a separate dwelling unit for the purpose and scope of 3023 for 2-family dwelling separation. And again, there's other people that do review and code officials on here that may disagree with me, so I'd love to hear their opinion. Maybe they agree. I don't know. Thanks.
Angela, go ahead.
So Micah is correct that due to the placement in the code that is specifically under the fire separation sort of portion of it, that it is one of those where and it could at some point, maybe that's a code suggestion for this upcoming thing, is to say, it shall not be considered a separate dwelling unit in a 2-family dwelling where this blah 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 for the purposes of fire separation, to make it a little more clear. But if you are specifically based on where it's located, then yes, that's the only place that it's not to be considered as a dwelling unit, not dwelling. Yeah.
Okay, as I read 302.3, the first sentence, it does appear to say exactly what Micah described, that wall and floor ceiling assemblies separating dwelling units, like all of 302.3 is for wall and floor ceiling assemblies. And I think, Dustin, that's where all of your references come from, right?
Yes.
311.
Three 11.2 just talks about the egress doors. There's no Washington amendment to that section.
Okay. In which case then we would need, so would the answers to 2 and 3 be yes?
With the shift in perspective, yes, that would
Okay.
require a change in the answer. And to be frank about it, there's been differing opinions amongst staff when we discussed this one as well. That there's consideration for the point of view that Mike is presenting.
I'm just going to offer my opinion that there's always going to be an intent, and we're always going to come up across these, and we are here with at least 2 people from WABO who agree that an exception is meant to be for wall and floor ceiling assemblies, not for the others. So I think the intent is, as Micah said, I mean, that's so I think that we should modify those to yes, and while I'll finish my opinion, Angela, and I'll call on you. And I also don't like to always just push everything off. But again, since we do have another meeting in a week from now, I don't want to spend a lot of time next week because I know it's going to be a long agenda. But if we wanted to push this off till next week and clean it up then, that would work, unless you're comfortable trying to get that done. Do it on the fly. So Angela, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, the original intent, I remember when this was put in the code, was to create, it was along the lines of kind of the creating more affordable, sort of accessible housing, and the fact that, you know, changing it's kind of, it was meant kind of for the basement that you want to build out into an accessory dwelling unit. Adding a 1 hour separation, 1, usually can't meet the head height, 2, it's just really expensive and hard to do. So yeah, that was where this kind of stemmed from. So yeah, but the other 2 items, I think, yeah, they're still required for it to be a separate dwelling unit, practically. Yep.
Okay, Ben, welcome.
Hi, and I think Micah might have been before me, but I'll defer to him if he wants to go first.
Okay, go ahead, Micah.
You're set. We won't go back and forth. Thanks, Ben.
Micah's
I was
eating.
gonna say you can go ahead and go. I was also going to mention that on question 2, the answer I think is different depending on whether it's an attached or detached accessory dwelling unit. I know maybe the question or background on this is talking about a dwelling unit within, which would be attached, but a detached dwelling unit, an attached dwelling unit that has interconnectivity with the primary dwelling unit maybe doesn't need its own egress, but a detached one would. So I mean, there's maybe some more nuance there. Maybe we need to expand the answer or even expand the question in question 2. Thanks, Ben. Please go ahead.
Well, as I've been wordsmithing the answers here, I think that I've got the answer to number 1 maybe written better. That no, it's not considered a separate dwelling unit for the purposes of fire separation. When we're talking question 2, I do think that they're talking about dwelling units within an accessory dwelling unit, but does an accessory dwelling unit need separate egress doors? I'm changing that answer to yes, where the accessory dwelling unit has all required smoke alarms interconnected, is not considered a separate dwelling unit for the purposes of fire separation. However, section 311.2 requires a minimum of 1 egress door per dwelling unit. And I think that that's in alignment with how we've been discussing this one. And then I would still need to revise the answer to question 3, which is just, yes, it requires a separate thermostat, but it's not considered a separate dwelling unit. It's the fire separation part. That's what's been driving my answer for all of this, is the contents of 302.3 here and the definition of the dwelling unit. So I'm happy to change that, and I don't have a lot of skin on the game for defending the answer as I have drafted.
Can I'll just have a comment and then I'll call on you, Ben. I think that what I read, because of the background, I thought we were only talking about dwelling units constructed within an existing dwelling unit. So it's not detached. But
Correct.
I'm
And that
wondering
was-
if question 2 should be clarified that we are only responding to that case where it is, built within somehow. So Ben, go ahead.
Great. Thanks, Roger. And just to provide some background, we discussed this interpretation request at the MVP committee earlier today, and specifically for question 3, as it related to the thermostat question. And the group there, we weren't able to come up with a solid recommendation. I think some of it was going to be kind of thinking about the language a little bit more and seeing the results of this meeting. We did discuss kind of some of the other code requirements, the residential code. Maybe this has been discussed, but our 501.1.2 of the Residential Energy Code has specific requirements for thermostats for accessory dwelling units. So that is pretty clear on requiring a separate thermostat for that what is called a separate, not separated dwelling unit. So this is getting into some specific terminology. So one of the things we thought about in the committee meeting was revising the answer to indicate that yes, separate thermostats are required for separate dwelling units. And you can see the kind of definition here of a separate dwelling unit, where independent facilities for living, sleeping, cooking, bathing, and sanitation are provided. So really the matching the dwelling unit definition. And in the residential energy code section, it's really only requiring the thermostat to be provided on here, and then relating it back to the R403.1.1 requirements, which kind of stipulate some of the programmable and setback capabilities of that device. So I think the intent is that there is a separate means of control. So in case one of the 2 spaces or dwelling units is not occupied for some time, you're not losing control of the other space in that instance. So I would agree with kind of as that I think Dustin or Krista's making right now, but I think Krista, can you remind me of the outcome of what we talked about at the committee meeting if we had kind of deferred MVP committee action until the next meeting? I think is my recollection.
Correct. Whether it was revisited at the next MVPE committee meeting or at a future council meeting.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, and thank you. So that's kind of I think it's in line with what others have been discussing for this item. But thank you.
Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, on question 2, it says, do both the primary dwelling unit and accessory dwelling need separate egress doors? And I think shouldn't that say dwelling unit? Just like question 1 and question 3 have dwelling unit. And being a dwelling unit, I think it does require a separate egress door.
In question, the question number 2, you're saying, Dan, right?
Yes. Yep, right there. Yep.
Yeah.
But to
Makes
answer it, I'm with, there's a little bit of me like what Micah said, is if it's an accessory attached or detached. But if we're calling it a dwelling unit inside of a dwelling unit, I think it does require a separate egress door.
Okay.
In my opinion. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. And I'm wondering, Dustin, in question number 3, do we also need to be really clear, and I'm trying to read and see if I do, that we are addressing the case where there is a dwelling unit constructed within an existing dwelling unit. Yeah, like right after that, say, constructed within an existing dwelling unit, so that's clear. And you guys are gonna need to deal with the terminology of dwelling and dwelling unit. Does that sentence now make sense? Micah?
I have to think about whether or not it makes sense, Roger, and I appreciate Dan for pointing that out. Just for reference purposes, dwelling and dwelling unit have two separate definitions in the residential code. So we may want to review this a little closer on which we're intending to reference in the answers or questions even. Because it could be a little different how we interpret it. But we've got time since it sounds like the folks want to kind of move this, give a little more time for review thing.
I was also wondering, Dustin, if in your answer to number 3, you were just looking at an R50 something that you'd called up. Yeah.
Just
501.1.2.
look at the section. I did read through here a little bit, but since this section was specifically for accessory dwelling units, this is the prime spot where I came to for the answer there.
And I just am wondering if you would, in the answer, you would say per 501.2.
I can definitely do that.
Go ahead, iPad again. I forgot your name. Sorry.
I'm sorry, I had to be at another meeting. Darren Homchick.
Darren, that's right.
Yeah, sorry about that. So I agree with Micah that IRC 30231 number 2, the exception for interconnective to get rid of the 1 hour fire separation for 2-family dwellings. It mentions 2-family dwelling, and then also it mentions a dwelling unit within the same paragraph. And so it doesn't make them one. All it does is get rid of the fire separation. They're still defined in that paragraph as a 2-family dwelling and as a dwelling unit. So they're 2 separate dwelling units within that 2-family dwelling. All that does is get rid of the fire separation. So I just want to mention that.
Yeah. Okay. Todd, go ahead.
So with this distinction between dwelling and dwelling unit, shouldn't question 2 it's correct in the first part that there's a primary dwelling unit and accessory dwelling unit when built within an existing dwelling. Isn't that what we're saying? One building?
Oh, so remove that unit.
Well, is that correct? Am I understanding that right?
I think
Yeah.
that would be in line with Darren's comment, and I think I
A
agree.
dwelling has 2 dwelling units, a primary and a accessory. Okay.
Dwelling can technically have one dwelling unit as well.
I see that now.
It's an odd definition.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But is that the correct interpretation though, Micah?
I think that's I think you're correct on that. Again, I'd have to spend a little more time with it, but at initial blush, yes.
Okay, then in the question number 3, the second dwelling, should that be just dwelling and not dwelling unit? And I will be completely honest, I'm confused, but
Yeah, it should just be dwelling, right?
I think so.
I would agree. I think there is a view that we could say it's constructed within an existing dwelling unit, and that deals with the non-fire separated. But I think for the purposes of this question, it's most appropriate to list it as a dwelling, not a dwelling unit.
Okay.
Yeah, you can't have a dwelling unit in a dwelling unit. Well, I mean, is that correct?
I think it's correct. It sounds, it was a humorous notion.
Okay.
Just funny sounding.
So I want to ask a procedural question. It sounds to me like this group, which does have some bends here from the MVP committee. Do we want to move this along? Do we want to postpone it a week? It sounds to me like we're at a spot where other than getting coordination from the MVP group, we think we've arrived at correct answers.
Roger, I propose we move it forward if we're ready, and then if Dustin and team catch anything over the next week, we have an opportunity to fix it next.
So go ahead and approve this Should we approve it pending approval by the MVP committee? Although that committee doesn't meet for a while yet, correct?
Correct. It won't meet until January 10th as,
Yeah,
so it stands.
Ben, go ahead.
I guess as another option, would it make sense to have it brought up at the next council meeting for review?
I think that's the
It's
right
also
answer.
right about the same time as that, proposed committee meeting. We're looking at that first week in January for the next council meeting. The first full week in January, I should say.
But it makes sense if we have two standing committees needing to review it, that it
Yeah,
just comes together at the full council.
okay, so can I ask for a motion to approve this opinion as shown on the screen? And I guess we would, in the motion, pass it along to this version of the response onto the MVP committee for their response.
Roger, or is it just simply pass it on to the council? Because then we can come together as a council and say both
Okay.
committees have reviewed it and we all are there and can say yes.
Okay, that sounds like what we should do. Micah, do you have comments?
And just on the, I guess it's their question and it's not relevant to our answer on question 3. Never mind. I'll ignore that because that's their question. Sorry.
All right, so Todd, are you ready to make a motion?
I move that we send this to the full council.
Okay. Do I have a second?
This is Dan, I'll second.
Thanks, Dan. Any more discussion? Hearing none, all those say aye. Who support the motion?
Aye.
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 Thanks. Any opposed? All right, motion passes. I believe that gets us to agenda item number 6, which is the IFC petition package. And Dustin, I'm curious, what's your intent to go through those? I will remind everybody, we've taken an hour and a half. We've got 2.5 hours left. So we
We're
will
not
take a
running
break
over
here
that
at some
long,
point, but
I don't think, but, we're, the intent here is to move this package along to the full council. I would, like to move it in the manner, we kind of moved it at the, final, or at the last IFC tag meeting where we opened it up for discussion, asked for particular petitions, to target for discussion. And instead of reviewing each specific one, I would compare to the MVPE meeting this morning where we discussed, and there's kind of a high level overview of what was contained in the spreadsheet there. There's some petitions that were withdrawn by proponents. I don't believe that there were any denied by the tag for the fire tag. And then there was a brief discussion on where some of the changes were on the petitions for the MVPE. But there's more content within this package than was within that one this morning. And so my intent would be to ask if there's any specific section that anybody here or from the public would like to talk about. And if not, then we entertain a motion to move it towards the council.
go ahead, Micah.
Thanks. I put my hand up a lot. Dustin, I see as part of this package that the R3 occupancy item for 13D sprinklers and the carbon monoxide detection item is part of this package. Were those modified for the IBC tag, or are those going forward as approved by the IFC tag, but not further correlated with the IBC tag? Thanks.
So what Micah is bringing up is at yesterday's IBC tag meeting, there's 2 proposals that touch both the building code and the fire code. And at yesterday's building code tag, there was some modification to those. So the answer to your question, Micah, is no. What's going to be shown here today is not going to contain the changes as brought forth by the IBC tag. We did bring these proposals to our correlation group to try to get consistent language across both codes. I didn't anticipate changes occurring yesterday, but it would be my hope to move this as recommended by the IFC tag, and then bring up the differences at the council meeting, and correlate those at that time when we get to that meeting. And that's kind of
Dustin, I would request that those two items get flagged somehow on the spreadsheet.
okay.
Pending approval with correlation with the IBC tag or something. I think the notes column on the right would be an appropriate spot to do those, just so everybody's clear that that correlation still has to happen with those two things, but it's been approved by the IFC.
Gotcha. I have prepped up. I got a PDF of what's going on here right now. Give me a moment. I'm gonna pull up the working spreadsheet.
Okay.
And I'll get ready to note those as we go through this.
Mike, is your hand up again or still?
Yeah, I was up again. I appreciate Dustin trying to push that to the full council. It seems like maybe we'd have time to revise or resend those back to the IFC tag, or a combined IFC IBC meeting to where they can correlate those. I don't think the changes were super major. But the carbon monoxide one, we didn't actually have changes yesterday. I think there were questions about accuracy and what we were doing as a retroactive issue for carbon monoxide. So it would almost, in my preference, if you're not that it's I'm not on the tag, but I would rather see the tag pull those, get them revised, and appropriately discussed between the tags before spending all that time at the SBCC and still maybe not get a clear answer. Thanks.
So my thoughts on that would be, if that's the desire of this group here to reconvene those tags, that we shouldn't consider this whole package at this time.
You want to have the packages as a single package?
I mean, I would like to, but if we want to, so also at yesterday's meeting, we did pull I believe there's two proposals in there that are needing some more work that we feel won't be able to be done by the time we're trying to push these whole packages out. And so they're kind of being pulled out of the IBC Group 1 code package, and we're kind of creating a IBC Group 1B potentially to give time and more work and attention to specific proposals. I would, if we want to flag the specific ones we're talking about right now, I got to go back to my notes and find the specific numbers, unless Micah's got those off the top of his head. We can move the package and pull those ones out as well. It's up to the group here how they would like to go. Just for ease of handling everything, I've been trying to keep it all together.
Todd?
Yeah, I think that's what I wanted to talk about was, and totally understand that that's the, give me 1 second here. Okay, I'm sorry. So what I was saying is, I've been trying to review our policies and procedures for this. I think it's the desired pathway, and that's understood, Dustin. But technically, I don't think it's in our procedures or policies how this is handled. Is that a correct statement?
I would say that we have in the policies, there's an established Group 1 and Group 2, but how the Group 1 and Group 2 are specifically handled is not necessarily spelled out all the way. So if we're pulling proposals out of the main package body, I don't think there's anything that prevents us from doing that. So there you go.
I guess maybe what I'm stating is, if there are things like this correlation on the carbon monoxide yesterday or other proposals, there is still opportunity, and I don't think it gets so far out of sequence that we can't still consider it at the full council and move it forward in group 1. I had received a couple of phone calls today that are we pulling certain proposals out and therefore putting them in group 2? And I don't think that's what we intended yesterday. We're just saying that we still have time and before we go into in CR 102 filing.
Correct. And, you know, there's some time. So we're not intending to have any meetings the week of Christmas or the week of the New Year. I suppose there's always time to potentially have a meeting the week of the intended council meeting. I'd like to try to avoid getting those any further than that first full week in January. After that, the legislative session will kick off, and there will be just a new challenge to contend with having overload status. So
Understood that and respect that on the staff requiring. I think what I want to say though, that let's define what the actions are today, because we intend to move forward a package, but there could be individual proposals that get pulled out, discussed, and we might take different actions on those individual proposals. We might say put it, amend it, put it back in the package. That's one option, I think. I think the other option is to push it back down to the TAG for further work, knowing that we can still get it back in some pathway.
I think that there's definite room for both of those methodologies. I think if we were trying to move the package as we have here today with some caveats for specific petitions to get more work, that it would be totally appropriate. I guess once it gets to the council meeting, I'd like to try to have a full, not have this resurfacing as group 1 straggling proposals coming through again at the council meeting.
So Dustin, I want to go back. I mean, even the conversation that we had at the beginning of the meeting about the economic impact, really the drop dead date is the middle of the year when we're publishing the CR 102, right? And your wish and desire, which I certainly support, is to have all the packages complete for that early January council meeting, right?
Yes.
I think it's in my opinion, this group could send I would like to say we could approve this with both of the items. There's a note on the tag that final correlation has to happen with the IFC tag on language. And that can occur between now and that January meeting. I mean, I'm wanting us to, there will be these proposals may very well get updated and changed. The wording may get updated and changed even at the end of the year when we get public comment. I mean, that's obviously why we're asking for public comment is, so I get a little bit, I want to push back a little bit where we think we have to have perfectly worded and perfectly correlated things before we approve the whole package. In my opinion, if we flagged it that we know there are 2 items here that need to final correlation, that can occur. And it really only has to happen before we file CR 102. And Dustin, I would even suggest to you that at the early January council meeting, if we didn't get one of these items correlated, the council could approve it, knowing that we have to do final correlation of this between the IFC and the IBC. And then if we came back at a February or March meeting saying, okay, this correlation has happened, so now we want official approval of the council for this particular item, that doesn't seem like a whole lot of extra work. So, Micah?
All right, I lost which screen my mouse was on. I think you're going down the right path there, Roger, where you could move the whole package forward. I was just asking the question on those few proposals that still had issues. Part of our WAC rules for our policies and procedures, WAC 50-104-02, item 3E talks about the completion of the council's review of Group 1 amendments, not including Group 1 amendments. The council directs be kept open for consideration during the Group 2 period. So that's kind of where we get into the rules of how do we do this. You can keep open specific proposals. I think maybe Todd kind of brought that up is do we bring specific ones back or we bring the whole package? We can move the whole package forward. The council can direct the specific ones remain open for Group 2 or a portion of Group 2. That's allowed by our current policies and procedures. I think that's all I was kind of indicating and questioning Dustin on. I fully support moving all these forward, except the ones that need to be correlated. We need to have that in there, and that wasn't noted anywhere on the document provided. So that was my question. Thanks, Dustin. Thanks everybody for the discussion. You need that RC or WAC rule number again? Let me know.
Micah, do you have the proposal numbers that need correlation? I think Dustin asked that, if you have the numbers.
Oh, looking at the list, it's going to be, if you go down, the 13D proposal, I want to say is GP 1091.
Yep. I think
And
it's
the carbon monoxide is the one just after that, 071, if I remember those two. And I think, Dustin, you mentioned a couple others that had some outstanding items. I can't remember. Those are the two I remember from yesterday. Again, thanks for the discussion. It's on page 3, top of page 3.
So I'm still, while I was talking, I was not pulling up files that I can modify here. So give me 2 moments.
Thank you all. I'm going to sign off. Going to my son's swim meet. Have a great afternoon. Talk to you
Thanks,
next week.
Micah.
See ya.
Okay, Todd, go ahead.
Yeah, so while we're doing this, just what Micah was mentioning, as we go to WAC 5104020, that's the rules for consideration of proposed statewide amendments. Can you remind us of the timeline? So yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean for you to be multitasking and pull that up too, but you're good at this, Dustin. Okay, in 3EC, that's where it says the timeline shall include deadlines for committee transmittal to council of separate reports for Group 1 and Group 2. That's what we're doing, right?
No, those were the significant changes in existing amendments reports.
But it
I
also
guess
says
number
C3.
3. Yeah, so this, I guess, upon a fuller reading of that section, yes.
Okay. But I don't remember, do we have in our timeline, is this a specific date?
I don't believe that we have a specific date on here.
Okay.
So one of the things I'm trying to get out there, and I was hoping to, be past a council meeting coming up next Friday, but we're not going to get there at this moment, was to get a updated revised schedule out there for the remainder of the 2024 adoption schedule. I can include specific dates in there for that. One of the things that I found with the schedule that's out there is it's a little hard to read because there's sections where we have, our proposal period is, the period for us to do our reports was a 3-month period. And then below it is, I feel like a Gantt chart is needed to display the content correctly so that it's easily read to see where it falls on the timeline. But as of right now, I don't believe that we have specific dates here for these. I can pull up what's online right now if my stuff stops giving me issues here.
Okay. And that wasn't by any means I got you on the council. It's just, we're trying to be as transparent as possible and explain this process and
This is what's published online, and it's pretty confusing in my opinion, but looking for, where we were shooting for at the beginning of this process, November 15th meeting, we were supposed to be, having the council accept or overturn recommendations, to the proposals back to the tag in, looking for the direction of the council to file CR 102. So, if there's a specific date here, only because we have, our published schedule of
Yep.
meetings there. But as far as a requirement, this can shift around, and it obviously already has.
Okay.
So I see, Roger, you're squinting at the screen there. I can make this a little bigger.
That's because I have you on my laptop and my big screen has the other information, so. Go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, I think the purpose of the official policies and procedures is that the council, sets the agenda. You then try to very closely follow, or not the agenda, sorry, the schedule. And you then try to closely follow the schedule, and you are allowed to make changes, as extenuating circumstances happen or things get delayed, but you then officially change the schedule and publish that so the public knows the expectation of what's going to happen and when it's going to happen, and they can respond accordingly. The problem that I've had as a stakeholder is the schedule is now very much out of whack, and it hasn't been updated in some time, and so it's really hard to say what is going to happen when ahead of time because everything's behind schedule now. And so then sometimes the counselor staff have done things and it's kind of taken me by surprise because I wasn't expecting it to happen, even though we're already behind schedule, but then they're not providing much notice for when things start and stop. So yes, you have the ability to be flexible and change the schedule, but as a stakeholder, I would prefer, if you're going to change the schedule, then change it quickly, and then once it's set, try really hard to stick with it. But we're kind of at a point where the schedule's way out of whack. We still haven't updated it, and now you're talking about still, kind of delaying it more and more and more. And I think there's potential if we don't get this group one stuff done and finished off, I think there's potential where we're going to put a lot of workload on staff trying to do everything that they need to do to get the CR 102 ready while having to juggle all the stuff with group one and then potentially other things that are coming up. So just trying to be mindful of that. And if we can get the schedule updated as soon as possible and then try to stick with that, that's what I would prefer as a stakeholder. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick, and I agree. I believe that we should update this schedule at the next council meeting and have it real clear. I would actually suggest to you that we have just about caught up. I mean, that's why, yeah, we were shooting for November, but really the kickoff of group two is in January, and I think we're really close to having the group one stuff wrapped up. Yeah, we're kicking into the first week of January, but I feel like, and I will even say, I know some of the codes, the model codes were not published on time, so we got a late start. I actually feel like we've done a pretty good job this year of trying to get the group one moved forward and getting us caught back up on schedule. And I have said at council meetings, I try to have taken it on as the keeper of the schedule. Anytime something comes up that might impact our schedule, I always try to make sure I flag that. I don't want us to, I don't want us to push the schedule out any farther than possible. So appreciate the comment. Todd?
yeah, appreciate the comment. There's always room for improvement, but I think we're being very transparent and have been the whole time. So now we're talking about the minutia of this specific step and how we're going to get, we're going to move this forward and deal with a few proposals that need additional work and what the process is to push them back down. And that's right in the schedule here, that the council accepts or overturns recommendations or refers proposals back to the tags. That's the step we're approaching right here now. The things that are finally getting to the full council for consideration. We're all going to get eyes on these things. And then some of them are going to need more work, and we want the subject matter experts to do more work. So that's all I meant by asking all the process questions here.
And again, I'm trying to understand the process. So those two items that need more correlation, could we move this whole package forward, flagging those two and basically putting final approval of the correlated documents on the hands of the council?
And if I may speak, that's what I've been promoting in the
Okay.
tag, saying, yes, we obviously want to get these as advanced technically as we can. But remember that when it gets to the council there's precedent that we've often pushed things back to do more work in the tag and get immediate, response.
Mhm.
That's just how the process has worked, and it's defined in that schedule right there. Even if the date's off by a month or two. Yeah.
And I also think that we could move the package forward pending additional to the council with direction to do some more correlation work prior to that meeting. I would hope that I could establish good quorum of both of the IBC and IFC groups, maybe the week of the new year. I'd like to try to avoid having any correlation groups meeting the week of that council meeting. I know that the APA only requires 24 hours. We have some other stuff elsewhere that requires 48-hour notice. But I think that bringing a large package like this to the council meeting warrants giving more time for the public to digest the content. So folks that maybe aren't at every tag meeting who don't necessarily know the content of what we're moving forward have time to review that and be able to make some comments if they want to.
Go ahead.
And I would say the danger of not pushing things forward that we anticipate, we know we want more public process, is that we don't have visibility on it as a whole council, and the public doesn't have full visibility. And an example might be, and I'm not jumping to what the tag is going to do next Tuesday, but we have 3 EV proposals, parking proposals, that it very well may be that all of them move forward because more information is needed at the council level, including probably a cost benefit analysis to really make a decision on what those numbers that should be chosen should be, that maybe it's not appropriate at the tag level. So that's an example of we're moving forward and then be able to still push back to the tag if more information is needed. Okay, thanks.
And I will also add, Dustin, I think what I would like to do is, coming out of this meeting, is you can post this for the public and the council members to look at. This is the approved list.
Yep. And
Everybody, you flagged that there are 2 items that still need to correlate, but everything else, everybody should be aware that this has gone through the tag. It's been approved by this committee. The next step is to go to the full council.
And I believe this page, minus the 2 yellow blocks you see on screen, I believe it's posted online. I have to
Okay.
double check, but I
Okay.
should have it up.
All right. I'm going to ask, is there any other discussion, or are we ready to make a motion?
I have one more. I want to air something else out. What is the procedure when something sits in a tag? Does it absolutely have to be recommended to the council? We know now that it can be denied at that tag level, but is there any precedent for the council to pull a petition back up if for some reason the work's not done? I know it's not best practice. That's not what I'm asking, but I'm asking, in our rules and procedures, what prevents that if something stalls out?
I'm going to call on Patrick. I may have an opinion on that, but go ahead, Patrick.
I believe the language that 6029 added to the RCW is that tags have to approve proposals in order for the council to take action on them. So that doesn't necessarily, it doesn't really matter whether or not they deny something. If they don't approve something for adoption, then it can't be considered by the council for action. So they could theoretically, in my reading of that, keep, a proposal at their level and never send it forward to the committee or the council, and it still couldn't be pulled up by the council because they didn't positively approve it.
Can I ask, I think we have time, can I ask for that language to get pulled up? 60, Patrick, you know the number?
You want the bill?
Yeah,
Well, what's the RCW is probably more appropriate at this point, right?
sure. The RCW that has been,
2730. Yeah. There you go.
session for amendment.
I think, also there could be an argument made that if a petition's not referred to a tag, it's not subject to this rule, but I'm not suggesting that be a tactic.
No, and we refer to everything. So that's what I mean. We're in that provision right there. That's what I was trying to raise the discussion about. Yeah.
One of the other things that I'm trying to be make sure I always flag is if we're gonna make decisions based on RCW, I want to have it pulled up so everybody can read it and interpret it their own way, but I agree with Patrick. It says it must be approved. So Todd, I think that if it flounders in a tag, I don't believe that there is a way for the council to pull it back up.
And that's the point I'm trying to make. Yep. So,
Yeah.
But the timeline for the tag to action or to take action isn't clearly defined.
Yeah. Okay. Good question. All right, I go back to, are there any other questions or comments, or are we ready for a motion? Then may I have a motion to move the IFC tag approved petitions to the full council for consideration?
So moved. I was just thinking how to craft it, but you did it.
Second, Angela.
Oh, Angela got it first.
Yep.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the motion is approved. Other business. Do we have other business?
I don't have any for anybody.
So I have a quick question here. When I looked at the tag member cycle appointees and stuff, I think we got something messed up on the page. Because I thought when we looked at this, we put a bunch of, we made some changes to the fire or the WUI tag, and it looks like it was put under single exits and the WUI are flipped.
Get to where we're talking.
While Dustin is getting there, I'm just going to remind everybody, I don't have a official invitation to a meeting next Friday, but I have blocked out 1 to 5. Again, hoping it doesn't take 4 hours, but we will see. So.
And that was the intent, was to schedule that meeting at the 1 to 5. I was actually intending 1 to 4 time frame, but do you think it would be beneficial to schedule it for the additional hour?
I thought we were moving it to the morning.
Well, we haven't really talked about that within this group. So Dan, you were saying,
Yeah, let's answer Dan's question.
you were thinking that there's a mistake here on the WUI tag?
Yeah, because I thought when we were discussing this, because when we were looking at it, we were going to have fire officials for counties and cities under the WUI, and it looks like it's under single exits. I think we just have to move the two. Am I remembering wrong? Because I thought I volunteered to be the chair alternate for WUI, not for single exits.
Well, so as far as changes made to the WUI residential and single exits tag, that happened at 2 separate meetings. The specific dates I don't have off the top of my head. But at one, we broke apart the WUI tag from the residential code,
Uh-huh.
and I'd have to go back and do some research to see what shook out at that meeting. But then at the last time we addressed any sort of tag was for the single exits and multiplex housing, and I'd have to go back and look.
Anyway, yeah, I was trying to find that too. So if you find it, let me know and I'll reread it, but I couldn't find it.
Okay.
So that's why I was bringing it up, just
I
because my
can
memory
definitely
was.
check into it and make sure we have the most accurate representation here. When we posted this one, Todd reached out to me and let me know that I had the wrong I had the draft version of the single exits multiplex housing posted, and so this got changed 2 days ago to be the more accurate one, which was the one passed at the council meeting. And I would have to dig in on the residential WUI. I'll have to check them all, make sure that we have an accurate accounting there.
Yeah, because I tried to find it and I couldn't find it, but thank you, Dustin.
Dustin related, so these are open right now, and I'm assuming you are getting applications.
Not an overwhelming amount, but yes.
Okay. We'll need to, that's fine. We leave it open for 30 days, right? And then we start recruiting, isn't that?
Correct. And I've had some notion, or I haven't had the notion, but I've had some requests to extend the recruitment a little bit. But one reason I don't want to extend the recruitment is we need to fill out the residential energy code tag to help us with the council motion made at the November 22nd meeting to address I-2066. So getting that tag filled out as swiftly as possible will be beneficial towards making changes.
And I will, Angela, I will get to you, but I also want to be clear. I think that the again, in the RCW that we're looking at with the new law, we have to allow 30 days, we have to allow it just open for anybody. Then we start recruiting, but that 30 days is so that the the largest industry representative can try to get their applicants in. I think that in my opinion, this is my opinion, 30 days is it's open. After that, we certainly are going to take any applications we get, but at that point, after 30 days, we are out trying to recruit people to fill those positions. So it's kind of 30 days of open and then an undetermined amount of time to start filling it out, and then we start having the meetings. So okay, Angela, go ahead.
Yeah, so Dustin, I just wanted to make sure that I believe Tara sent in Wabo's nominations for the building official back all together for group 1 and 2. Do you need her to resend the group 2?
I should still have them, but just to bring it to the top of the list, it would be beneficial if they were resent in, just so I have them. And if I get duplicates, I get duplicates. That's okay.
Okay.
But just to make sure, that would help me a lot.
Okay, I'll tell her.
Okay, is there any other business? All right. Hearing none, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Appreciate
you.
everybody's time today. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye.